I don't know who needs to hear this today, but God can take a negative situation or a negative circumstance in your life and turn it into a positive. Such is the case with the hymn inspiration for today's devotional. This hymn was not like many of the hymns that we have looked at. Many of the hymns that we have discussed have grown out of the author's need in a given situation or moment, or it grew out of some type of experience that the author had gone through. It might have been positive, it might have been negative, but either way, this experience in their life drove them to a sense of dependency, a sense of crying out to God, or a sense of peace. And they wrote down these encouraging and inspiring words that remain to this day to bless the church. Well, that is not the case with today's hymn. Today's hymn actually grew out of controversy. The controversy involved the author, Augustus Toplady, as well as John Wesley. Now, Augustus Toplady was an ordained minister in the Anglican Church, the Church of England. He was a minister at the time on the island of Ireland. It just so happened that John Wesley also resided on that island at this time. And originally, Toplady was enthralled with Wesley's Arminian theology. But over time, Toplady's views began to change, and he became a proponent of Calvinism. Now, I need to contextualize this controversy just a little bit, and I'm not even going to scratch the surface. In order to just summarize the views of Arminianism or the views of Calvinism would take an entire quarter of Bible studies. And even then, again, we would just scratch the surface. But at its most basic, Calvinism teaches, first of all, total depravity. The idea is that man is so tainted with sin, he is so depraved, that he could not go to God for salvation if he wanted to. Kind of flies in the face of something Jesus said, "Come to me, all who are weary and heavy laden, and I will give you rest." Jesus seems to indicate that we can come to him. But regardless, Calvinism teaches that man is so affected negatively by sin that man cannot even go to God for salvation. Related to that is unconditional election. Since man cannot come to God for salvation, then God comes to man. This is where the doctrine of predestination comes in. God comes to man and decides who will or will not be saved, based on, yes, his divine knowledge or understanding, but nonetheless, it is God who does the choosing. Now again, that's a very, very sketch and only partial explanation of Calvinism, but likely you have heard some of this in the past. Now, by contrast to that, Arminianism teaches partial depravity. Yes, man is affected by sin in a huge and negative way, but he is not so affected by sin that he cannot come to God for salvation, which leads to conditional election. The idea here is those who do come to God for salvation can receive salvation, but is that individual's choice, that individual's decision to come to God for salvation. And so, on the one side, you have got Augustus Toplady, the Anglican Calvinist, and you've got John Wesley, the Methodist Arminian. Now, in this day, public debates were very common. Pamphlets would be printed and circulated, and even in the pulpits, it was not at all unusual for those who filled those pulpits to attack opposing viewpoints or even to attack another individual. This is called the ad hominem argument. It is a logical fallacy, and we see this today, especially in politics. Ad hominem is Latin for against the man. And so instead of using our arguments, our reason, our supporting evidence for our position, we will attack the individual. As a speaker, it is unethical. As an audience member, we should be intellectually honest enough, not be intellectually lazy or weak that we could not see through that. If you've ever heard someone say something like, "I wouldn't believe so-and-so if he told me the sky was blue," that's an example of falling prey to the ad hominem argument. I'm going to reject the argument not based on the evidence, not based on the supporting material, not even based on my own senses. I'm going to reject the argument based solely on the individual who is making it. And so this argument, this logical fallacy, the ad hominem argument, devolves into an attack against the other individual. And Toplady and Wesley engaged in a campaign of theological warfare that, yes, did include the ad hominem argument. Listen to just a couple of statements that have been preserved for us through history. Toplady said this: "I believe John Wesley to be the most rancorous hater of the gospel system that ever appeared in this island. Wesley is guilty of satanic shamelessness, of uniting the sophistry of the Jesuit with the authority of the Pope." Now, Wesley responded to that with his own ad hominem argument that was only thinly veiled as taking the moral high ground. John Wesley said this: "I dare not speak of the deep things of God in the spirit of a prize fighter or a stage player, and I do not fight with chimney sweeps." So this is the nature of the controversy that led to the writing of our hymn inspiration for the day. The year was 1776. The year was 1776, an important date in American history for sure, and we just celebrated that a couple of weeks ago. But Augustus Toplady wrote an article in the Gospel magazine, once again arguing his theological position of Calvinism against Wesley's position of Arminianism. And along with this article, Toplady wrote the words to a hymn that has been stated is one of the most popular hymns ever written, one of the most well-known hymns ever written. Toplady's hope was that this hymn would not only explain his theological perspective, but that perspective would be sung in churches throughout Ireland and beyond. But what was this hymn that was born out of controversy? Take a listen, and I'll be back.
Rock of ages, cleft for me, let me hide myself in thee. Let the water and the blood from thy rib inside which flowed be of sin the double cure. Cleanse me from its guilt and power. Not the labors of my hands can fulfill thy law's demands. Could my zeal no respite know? Could my tears forever flow? All for sin could not atone. Thou must save, and thou alone. Nothing in my hand I bring, simply to thy cross I cling. Naked come to thee fortress, helpless look to thee for grace. Thou light to the fountain fly, wash me, Savior, or I die. While I draw this fleeting breath, while my heartstrings break in death, when I soar to worlds unknown, see thee on thy judgment throne. Rock of ages, cleft for me, let me hide myself in thee.
Of this hymn, one historian said that the hymn meets the spiritual needs of all sorts and conditions of men, from the derelict snatched from the gutter by the Salvation Army to Prime Minister Gladstone, at whose funeral it echoed through the dim spaces of Westminster Abbey. You know, it is encouraging to know that despite the belligerent intent behind this hymn, that the Lord in His providence redeemed this hymn, and it has become a hymn that is sung by Calvinists and Arminians alike, as well as you and me, as a hymn of encouragement and edification. The Lord can take the negative situation, the negative circumstance that you are facing in your life, and He can turn it into a positive. Paul said it this way to the Roman church, "And we know that God causes all things to work together for good, for they who love the Lord, who are called according to His purposes." I've got nothing but big love for you. I hope you have a great rest of your day.